Okay, so now we have a strong document management foundation. Let's move on to setting clear information requirements because even the best document structure won't help if what's inside isn't accurate, structured, and deliverable.
From our experience, a lot of problems we've seen don't come from people not working hard. They come from the fact that requirements are unclear, disconnected, or just buried inside of massive spreadsheets.
Exactly. Teams often start with good intentions, but when detailed information requirements like TDIPs, MIDIPs, TIDPs, MIDPs, level of information need matrices, asset information requirements are scattered across spreadsheets, the risk of miscommunication skyrockets.
So our goal here is to show you a better way using a construction industry dedicated platform, one that's built on flexible, structured databases to define information requirements clearly, collaborate visually, and ultimately automate the verification process. I'm sure that you guys have been on projects where different teams had completely different interpretations of what was going to be required. Any stories that you can share?
Yeah, I was working on a huge transportation hub, and the importance, the priority of modeling ceilings or modeling ceilings at all or not, because that was coming from a different supplier. That was a huge miscommunication and resulted in a huge failure, not being able to do the coordination on time because of, just miscommunicating the priority of modeling those ceilings. It was pretty bad.
And then maybe, Louis, have you seen situations where lots of people are modeling the same thing?
Yes, lots of overlap, but also miscommunication on LOD, where modeling teams were accustomed to modeling to a certain LOD standard that they have internally, but there was different LOD expectations that were being requested by the client, but they just weren't communicated properly.
That beautiful term, LOD, certainly one that we'll dig into a lot more with level of information need and a whole bunch of much more practical ways to describe what's required. Yep, because spreadsheets can be a pretty difficult way to communicate those things. So why do we see, let's start there. Why do we see information management using spreadsheets fail?
On many projects we've worked on, the starting point was a spreadsheet, rows of tasks, deliverables, or properties, but it wasn't connected, wasn't standardized, and wasn't useful for downstream work.
Spreadsheets tend to introduce a lot of risk, like inconsistent formatting, difficult tracking of responsibilities and progress reporting, lack of clarity on what's contractual versus what's just internal, and no easy way to check compliance later.
And I think that the statistic is 83% of spreadsheets have at least one error. So we're working with a spreadsheet that unfortunately is likely to contain problems. And when it's contractual, that's difficult. So in short, spreadsheets might seem a convenient and maybe a fast way to get started, but they can create confusion, delay projects, and lead to major gaps between the contractual expectation and the actual project delivery. I have worked on many projects where the spreadsheets become so cumbersome. I've seen it be such a risk because when you're adding more requirements or more aspects to a project requirement, you end up putting more and more columns in a spreadsheet and it becomes just more and more cumbersome. And it's likely that only the person putting that spreadsheet together is the one that really truly understands it. And that can be just a huge risk. Trying to get somebody else to understand it is a problem. And when you've got multiple spreadsheets in this spreadsheet spaghetti, it becomes a nightmare when you come to try and share it with others and put it into contracts. Have you guys seen some of these things happening?
Yeah, I've seen spreadsheets connected to other spreadsheets. So a simple update in a template affected 3 other projects, and only one person can manage that, being aware that that may happen. So giving the responsibility to someone else and them not being there to see that spreadsheet get built and linked together could cause a lot of confusion and disruption in 3 different projects.
I remember that set of projects. Yeah, I think that when you're managing things and you look at spreadsheets, they become very unmanageable very quickly. And so what we're going to look at is what's the right approach? How do you get something that's structured, but also flexible, but also structured so that machines can also read it? How can you have all of that in one place? That's the difficulty. So, Louis, any ideas?
Well, instead of static spreadsheets, it is recommended to use a dedicated system designed for construction workflows, a system that captures detailed project information, requirements inside a flexible database.
This structure means you are not just recording data, you are clearly defining task information delivery plans, the IDPs, master information delivery plans, MIDPs, responsibility matrices, level of information need expectations, asset information requirements, and so on.
Yep. And because the information is stored in a structured way, not only can humans read it when you see it in a grid form, like we see on the screen here, but also it can be exported in a machine readable format as well, meaning that later the data can be automatically used to create some of the deliverables and also for automated checking as well. Even the elements inside of model files and handovers against exactly what was detailed in the information requirements that are part of the contract. That whole workflow can be connected. Are you guys seeing a lot of time that teams are spending creating these and maybe manually checking? What have you seen in the past?
Yeah, everything from having huge two screens. That's a typical setup for a BIM workstation, and trying to compare deliverable to Excel spreadsheet and trying to find out whether they match or not. But we even heard pretty recently, actually, that some of these spreadsheets were printed and trying to compare printed outputs to some deliverables. But when they introduced an automated system, they actually could save a headcount. They could reduce the team by not having to manually dig into those deliverables.
Yeah, I think that one specifically, if they're in a database that teams can understand and use to create content, and then also autonomously check, meaning they're checking it before they're forcing somebody else in the workflow to create a list of all of the exceptions, all the issues, and share those. That process can save a bunch of time. And actually, on one of the projects, we heard that they removed the need for their quality assurance piece. There's a part of it. 3 people, I think it was, they reassigned to more dedicated, more productive tasks rather than the rework in any QA and issues and issue fixing, which is pretty cool to hear.
Yeah, teams tell us one of the biggest breakthroughs is using a visual grid to show requirements. It's no longer a guessing game. Everyone can literally see what's needed, by when, and by whom.
Instead of dumping information into an ever-growing spreadsheet with more columns, more rows, and less clarity, a visual layout changes everything. Teams can instantly grasp what kind of geometrical detail or information is needed, when it's required across project milestones, who is responsible for delivering it, and how much detail is expected at each stage.
Yep, spreadsheets are great for storing data, but terrible for building shared understanding. And a database with a smart interface transforms requirements from a raw set of information into a visual contract that everyone can go through, agree to, print into an Excel or a PDF, but also have in a machine readable way that can start to become the difference in downstream workflows. It's the difference between hoping people read a dense document and actually aligning a team on what they've committed to. The clarity isn't just helpful at the start, it also becomes the foundation for accountability later on down the line. Visualized requirements create a single source of truth. So when it comes time to tracking deliverables or revisiting a milestone, there's no confusion. You're not chasing down emails or version 7 of a spreadsheet. You're reviewing the promises that were agreed up front. And that's why visual structured requirements lead to better collaboration, smoother contracting where everyone understands what they're signing up to, and therefore fewer surprises during the delivery. We've seen it time and time again where people actually change their entire view when they see the project laid out visually. Instead of being dense text like a spreadsheet like this, we're actually seeing it so much better through this visual display. And we actually have had feedback from executives that have not really understood BIM or information management, and they are shying away from, and they're actually not taking part in the workflow until they see that visual grid, and suddenly things change for them. And we've had really positive feedback where teams are basically saying, now my executive really understands, they're backing what we're doing, and we're getting results from this. What have you seen?
Yeah, not just with consultants and client relationships, but professors with their students. That engagement has been a lot easier to teach them what needed in project information. A spreadsheet isn't something that's very visual, so this grid has really helped students understand the needs of a model.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget that this is creating collaborative deliverables and agreements in the first place, but all the teams around the table, they are on a different step on their journey in information management adoption, and having a visual grid really helps them understanding, being on the same page on what is required, when it is required, who is responsible for that, and how it has to be delivered. So absolutely, we heard from teams that this visual nature is a great way to communicate the needs.
Yep. tied with the original purpose as well. Absolutely. So we've talked about the use of that visual grid. What about machine readable information? We talked briefly about this concept of information delivery specifications. Louis, how can we take that a bit further?
Yeah, just defining the requirements isn't enough if they can be checked later very easily.
Yep. That's why we recommend using the IDS from Building Smart, the information delivery specification, which allows us to define the requirements in a human readable format in this beautiful visual spreadsheet that we just mentioned, but also output as a machine readable XML file that can be read by receiving applications for very many different use cases.
Yep, exactly. So you get the best of both worlds. And in this example, you can see the IDS file being created, which is, as Akos mentioned there, a machine readable format that allows you to define exactly what information must be delivered in a way that can be later automated for verification in any model deliverable, and really streamlines the workflow. We even have ability to use that inside of modeling tools, like, for example, inside of Revit, where it will inject the exchange information requirements into the model as part of that workflow. What else do you see, Louis?
Yeah, you can define that all walls must have a fire rating value from a predefined list, or doors must have manufacturer and acoustic rating properties.
Yep. And they're all captured in the human readable and machine readable forms.
Right, and because IDS is a standard developed by Building Smart, it's not logged to one software solution. You can connect your requirements to multiple authoring tools or checking platforms.
Yep. By starting your project requirements with an IDS mindset, you're not just making requirements clear, but you're laying the foundation for automated, verifiable compliance later. Why do you guys think that many people are missing out on this opportunity to automate the checking?
Sure. I mean, in building information modeling, automated model checking has been around. It has a long history, but it rather has been a reactive process. You get a model, and using different tools or doing manual checking, you dig into it and try to understand what it contains. But the missing piece was that actually we don't communicate early enough in the project what we are expecting, what the use cases are going to be. Therefore, it's a huge amount of data that you have to dig into and try to reverse engineer what it can be used for. So automating the model checking now is turning into a proactive process when you first define in a visual way, collaboratively with your stakeholders around the table, what is needed, how it is going to be used. And after that, it's really maybe using IDS approach is really a piece of cake. It's a dream to check these models and automatically and validate the deliverables.
Yep, absolutely. So making the workflows easier is the key. We've seen that without these structured workflows and visual workflows and the machine readable side of things, you get missed deliverables, you get confused teams, inefficient verification processes, as Akos just explained, and just generally higher project risk. So with the right approach, you can create clear task and master information delivery plans. You can create exactly what you need for the asset information requirements. You can improve understanding across the design, the construction, and the operations teams. And you can enable all of these to be automated across all of these phases. It really does build trust and help you to deliver exactly what was promised. So these workflows are really important as you start to advance your processes in information management.
Yep, this is about making it possible to actually communicate, understand, agree to, and deliver what's needed, and with confidence.
All right, so we've talked about how to define more structured documents and a better management of the workflows and the revision processes and versions, etc. We've talked about how to define information requirements more clearly and in machine and human readable ways. But let's talk about how we create structured contracts using this content. Are you ready? Let's take a look at part 3. We'll see you there.